Hi, Andrew from Sachs, and welcome to video number 1 in our 8-video sequence on how to make better decisions in the artificial intelligence age. This is an investigation of what we know about how human beings make decisions, how people forecast what's likely to happen, and how accurate they are at that. But in particular, we'll be looking at a range of things that can be done in order to optimize people's decision making, particularly decisions that involve forecasting. This video will be talking about what decisions we're talking about, what's the definition of a good decision. In video number 2, we look at whether people are equally capable of making good decisions, neurology of decision making in video 3, broad-mindedness and positive emotions, how that affects decision making in video number 4. Video number 5 is about decision derailers, biases and other cognitive challenges. Priming is video number 6. And reducing susceptibility to biases and priming in video number 7. And finally, we're going to finish up in algorithm-based decision making. At the time of recording, there's a big debate on about artificial intelligence. What's your P doom for artificial intelligence? P means probability of doom occurring to us because of artificial intelligence. Will there be some grand collaboration of artificial intelligence computers that will knock us off our pedestal as the leading progenitors of planet Earth? Well, maybe. But in short, one of the things that I think we have to face up to is that artificial intelligence can, should, and will help us make better decisions. I'm not saying ethically it's the best thing that ever happened on planet Earth, but human beings struggle to make good decisions. You'll hear this in the video sequence, that the evidence for human beings making high-quality decisions is not particularly strong. So we're going to suggest that AI can support some of that. But first, let's talk about what decisions need to be made, because people management, of course, is the province of forecasts. Should we hire this person? Should we promote this person? This person's done bad things. Should we fire them or coach and develop them? Should we develop a competency framework? Will it pay off? By the way, the answer to that is almost certainly no. As a researcher in organisational psychology, competency frameworks are incredibly popular in the human resources community, but the evidence for them working that well is really not that great. I think teaching people how to do competency analysis is a worthwhile exercise, but having a competency edifice, a competency structure that everybody has to obey, I'm not sure that's a great idea. What HRIS should we buy? How long will it take to implement and what will it cost? Should we embark on a workforce plan? Will it be worth it? People management is the domain of predictions. When you decide to hire somebody, you are predicting that they will succeed. If we make decisions which are predictions, there are 2 characteristics that every good prediction must have. And the first is that it must be reliable. What do I mean by reliable? There are a range of things to do with reliability. There's a thing called inter-rater reliability. So imagine you've got a recruitment panel. If that panel intrinsically disagrees amongst itself, then that's a bad thing from a reliability point of view. If Mary thinks X and Bill thinks Y and Jane thinks Z and they can't agree, that means that that is an unreliable method. So whether the participants agree with each other, that's one component of reliability. Then you have a thing called test-retest reliability. So let's say that somebody applies for a job with you and they apply this week, and then 3 weeks later they apply for exactly the same job. First case, you decide not to hire them. Second case, you decide to hire them. Well, that can't be an entirely reliable method, because if they're good enough in the second case, then they should be good enough in the first case, if your recruitment method is good enough. Validity relates to whether this thing is likely to do a good job in the real world. If something's valid, if it's something that's a forecast, like a recruitment decision is, if it's accurate, you will find subsequently that the person, if you think they're going to work out, they do work out. That means that it's valid. The mathematical relationship between reliability and validity, though, is something cannot be valid as a measure if it's not reliable. So imagine you're using a tape measure, and this tape measure, you measure a desk and, okay, we get 1.2 meters this time. You use exactly the same tape measure subsequently to measure exactly the same desk, and you get 1.4 meters. And then you do it again and you get 0.9 of a meter. Well, that's unreliable, and we know that a tape measure that does that can't possibly be valid. So that's a definition. We have to make forecasts all the time in people management, and we then have to decide whether those forecasts have been accurate or not. And we can assess that by virtue of assessing prediction. So that's the model that we'll be adopting in this presentation. How can we make our predictions and our decisions more reliable and therefore give them a chance to be more valid. What's the record of human beings in this respect? Well, these are some examples from the wonderful Daniel Kahneman book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which really is the definitive text about human beings making decisions, in my opinion. Certainly in psychology, we've never created anything more comprehensive and more subtle in its understanding of the way the human brain operates. Let's just look at a few. Number one, stock trader study. No evidence that their predictions were better than chance. If you use a stockbroker to manage your portfolio of shares for you, well, they might be better than chance, but in fact, most stockbrokers aren't. And this has been demonstrated in a range of different studies. And so one of the alternatives to using a stockbroker to make your investment decisions is a thing called stock screening, where you set up an algorithm and you say, we will buy these shares and we will buy them based on certain ratios. And in fact, that has been demonstrated to be successful. There's a very famous book by a fellow by the name of O'Shaughnessy called What Works on Wall Street, written decades ago, but still holds true in many respects today. How about clinical predictions? Paul Meehl wrote a book which is often described as a disturbing little book, where he looks at the accuracy of clinical forecasts in comparison with algorithmic forecasts. Now, a clinical forecast, you go and see a psychiatrist and this psychiatrist says, well, you're going to get better. That's a forecast. A clinical forecast proves to be vastly less accurate than an algorithmic forecast, where you run some tests and you do some stuff like that, and then you forecast whether the person is likely, let's say, to be hospitalized or to get better or whatever. So that's a little disturbing. The reason that it's called a disturbing little book is it makes you wonder, all these people who are saying, well, you've got ADHD and you've got paranoid schizophrenia or whatever, how accurate are they? Indications are not very accurate at all. Why? There's an industry in buying the best wines in the world. So you go along to wine fairs and you taste stuff and you spit into a bucket and you say, I think that in 5 years' time, this wine will be beautiful. Now, companies invest an enormous amount of money. Millions, hundreds of millions of dollars get spent in this way each year. And if they're accurate, of course, this is a wonderful payoff, because 5 years down the track, you pull these bottles out and they're beautiful and you can sell them for a really big price. You buy it and it's no good 5 years down the track, well, there are very significant commercial implications for that. And Ashley Olenfelder developed a simple algorithm for doing this kind of forecast. Radiologists, well, sadly, if you give chest x-rays to radiologists, test, retest, so you give them a chest x-ray now, and then you give them the same chest x-ray, let's say 3 weeks later, 20% of the time, they do not agree with each other. So here's another one. I don't feel well. What's wrong with me? Well, you go to a doctor, right? Well, maybe in future you won't. And when we get towards the latter end of these 8 video sequence, we'll be going into things like algorithmic decision making backed by AI for diagnoses. Will we have a recession? Anybody who reads the writings of economists will know how incredibly poor they are at forecasting things like stock market crashes and recessions. And it's really interesting, because what you'll tend to find is that there are certain economists who forecast bad stuff all the time. And then, of course, they can pull out their latest article and say, well, I forecast this stock market crash or this recession. Well, if you forecast often enough, maybe you're going to be right. Will I be happy if I get married, have children, move to the seaside, buy a new house? Human beings are incredibly weak at forecasting how they're going to feel about things. So if I move to Queensland, let's say, by the way, Queensland, if you're not in Australia, is a sunny kind of a warm place. Maybe the Miami of Australia might be one way to describe it. But if I move there, will I feel better? People often feel that they're likely to be happier under certain circumstances, but the evidence doesn't back that at all. So the essence of this sequence is that good decisions are really hard to make. And the next in the sequence is all about why people vary in their capacity to make good decisions. Stick with us through the sequence, because we'll talk about how to make better decisions. To see the next video, click on the link near this one.